Thank you all for joining SSATB and me today. Happy to do this presentation. I've offered it a few times at a variety of SSATB conferences, and I hope it is as useful for you as it has been for me. When I submitted this proposal initially a few years back, the organizers politely suggested that I consider removing the influencing the 79% part out of the title. And the concern, I think an apt concern or a good concern, a wise concern, was that people wouldn't be sure what it meant, 79% of what. And the irony of that is that since I started at LCDS, Lancaster Country Day School, in 2009, my work has been consumed strategically with dealing with this number and how it can be worked. And what it refers to is historic surveys that reflect deep-rooted patterns pointing to the source of our inquiries. About 80% of our inquiries come from word of mouth. And the question for us today is, are 80% of our energies devoted to creating word-of-mouth conversations out there and influencing those conversations, when most people, including me, have seen the phrase word of mouth when it pops up in research as to where how people arrive at our schools and our websites. The temptation is to look closely and then say, well, it's done outside the office, and therefore it's out of our immediate range of responsibilities and influence, so let's focus on the things we've always focused on. And sort of today is to take a look at questioning those assumptions. This has happened before. Bear with me a second. It's not letting me escape out. Bear with me a sec, folks.
Are you having trouble with the display, Peter?
Yeah, it just isn't obeying the commands of my computer. This happened once before with ERB, and I may have to pop out and start up again. But that's going to, hold on a sec.
Would it help if I switch the presenter back to me, and then back to you again?
Why don't we try that?
Okay. Bear with us, folks.
Okay. Okay. It is now okay. So let's see if that works. Now, if you want to put it back to me, we'll see if that works.
Okay, it's waiting to view your screen, so yeah, there we go.
There we go. Okay, I think we're off and running. Thank you very much, Karen, for helping with that.
Excellent, no problem.
Through 2009, Country Day had developed a strong tradition of impressive academic outcomes. The school was regularly meeting its budget targets, and we had an enrollment of about 526. The challenges of increased tuitions had led to a slight but steady decline in applications between 2005 and 2009. Just walking through the market context, we effectively had only 3 regional competitors, and they weren't close by. The Hill School in Pottstown, about an hour away, Harrisburg Academy, about 45 minutes away, and York Country Day, 35 minutes away, but in a distinctly different enough area that we weren't really affecting one another. And this will come in as a more important detail later on. Our real competition were fairly affluent suburbs, successful public schools, and the boosters that they had, and an uneven local understanding of independent school advantages. One of the benefits of being a school, for example, in the Philadelphia or Baltimore, Boston area is you have a huge fraction of the population that understands independent schools' advantages. The downside is that then there's competition between those schools. So we were in a position where we didn't have a lot of competition, but we also didn't have a lot of people who understood what was different about us. And what I want to do here is look at, if you look at the left, you can see what we spend our time doing. I mean, this will immediately come across as familiar terrain in terms of our work as admission offices. We are working on our view books. We are working on our second visits. We are assessing. We are interviewing families. We're doing write-ups on those interviews. But it's worth noticing that all of those activities are after the inquiry stage, after we've gotten a prospect interested. And the question then becomes, is this focus sensible? Because if you, almost no matter how much you work on those areas, fundamentally you're constrained by how wide the prospect part of the funnel is. I can take my inquiries and interviews and applications and kind of move that part of the funnel a little bit out, but it's still constrained by how big the prospects are. And by focusing on those prospects and pulling them wider, you really can have an especially significant increase in all other parts of the admission funnel. There's a part about the mechanics of it that allows for inquiry changes to have a really significant impact on the rest of your funnel. Because fundamentally, because year after year we do so much work that has to do with the funnel after the inquiry stage, that when you do have a radical increase in inquiries, your funnel tends to go along with it. And so that's what we hoped to be able to accomplish by leveraging the inquiry stage of the process. So it's my suggested focus is to work on that, and that the admission funnel, if you just imagine your applications moving out that wide in an equivalent way, you'd be talking about a pretty significant increase in the number of applications to your school. So for looking at how to go about changing our inquiry patterns, what I like to do is walk through first what is it we typically do to improve our inquiry numbers. And the answer are fairly traditional and sensible things to do, which is we go to school fairs, we visit feeder schools, we cultivate relationships with those folks. We visit, we maybe work on website design and social media. We might study the demographics of a given area and try and mine full pay areas or other areas that are really important to us. We might hire a consultant to come in and look at changing, at assessing what the most important differentiable advantage is for our school, and then build an advertising campaign on the back of that, and then produce thoughtful advertising on the back of that, and or do that in conjunction with a diet of steady public relations efforts that our communications teams or offices might put together. And the end result of that is still limited. I like to use the example of Exeter and boarding schools. About 10 years ago, if you can imagine the most generous possible coverage of a set of schools, the U.S. News and World Report, with a fairly significant circulation of nearly 1 million regular readers, put together a cover story on boarding schools that featured Deerfield and Taft and Exeter and a number of schools. Probably Exeter had the greatest coverage. Just beautiful leafy shots of leaves falling on campus, graduates who'd gone on to fantastic universities. It was an accurate and very, very attractive piece. And this has nothing to do with Exeter. It's more a reflection of the relatively small impact that public relations can have on our schools. The year of this cover story that was about the best PR any school could ever hope for in their wildest imaginings, there were only 10 inquiries that year to Exeter that were related directly to the cover story. So the question then becomes, and another thing to ask yourself is, again, some people say, oh, you don't believe in website improvements. I do. We've done one ourselves just this past year. But again, as websites are responsible for only 10 to 12% of our inquiries, to make massive investments in them or to spend a tremendous amount of time working on them relative to word-of-mouth work, I think is not necessarily the wisest tack. So my point is not to end traditional tactics, but certainly to understand their deep limitations and assess and prioritize your time wisely. So again, the results of all these traditional tactics is the same size funnel, or a slight increase in good years economically and a slight decrease in years where we're going through a recession or something worse. Might move things down even more. But effectively, relatively little impact, again, because we're working with tactics that are all useful but all traditionally done and have relatively limited influence. And the question then is how to make this change. How do we have a significant impact on our inquiry numbers? And that starts with asking the question, why? Why do these clever ads, website changes, and even extraordinarily positive press fail to deliver these substantively more inquiries? Why is word of mouth so much more powerful than those triggers? And the answer starts with a case study I had in business school. I worked at Loomis Chaffee as the director of financial aid many years ago, just before business school. And so when I arrived at business school, I was looking at this one particular case study and having maybe the only MBA that had as his background working at a boarding school. I looked at this and said, this is the wrong case study in the sense that they should have been using boarding schools as the example because it was the perfect example. So what was this case study? What it was looking at was the relative level of difficulties families have moving from one type of product or service to another, or one type of brand to another. And they provided this spectrum of levels of difficulty in making that switch. And way over to the right, I would argue on the easiest side of the spectrum would be I choose paper clips for my example, because frankly, we all, and apologies to anybody out there who has a deep emotional tie to a certain brand of paper clips. You go into CVS, you look at the boxes, maybe you think about price briefly, but it's also inexpensive. It doesn't matter that much to you. You walk out of the store, you pay for it, and you never think about it again. In fact, when I'm not looking at it as I am today, I forget the brands of these paper clips immediately because it has absolutely no deep emotional connection to my psyche. If you went sort of 2 miles along the spectrum to the left would be, tragically, independent schools in the U.S. And I pick on Andover here because I actually went to Andover, so that was an easy one to find. But all these independent schools for non-traditional families, and when I say non-traditional, I mean folks that did not go to boarding schools or private schools themselves, and or folks that don't really have close friends that have, but just they don't have a personal experience dealing with it or know someone well who's gone to them, which frankly is the vast majority of our market. So way on the other end of the spectrum of levels of difficulty transitioning to a different service are those public school families and sometimes parochial school families who have never considered truly expensive independent schools. And why are they over? Why would I suggest that this is an appropriate example for this particular case study? And the answer is that we're asking for a change not in just one type of looking paperclip box to another, but rather a fundamental change in values, and one that's incredibly deeply connected to who we define ourselves as, which makes boarding schools and I think day schools just inside that end of the spectrum a perfect example of a really, really profoundly difficult jump. For those families who grew up going to public school and are most familiar with it, which is 85% of the American public or more, they are familiar, free, and in sync with their deeply familiar patterns. Private schools are foreign. They're incredibly expensive, and they're a threat often to those non-traditional, meaning non-private school families' pride. And I want to walk through this briefly for just a moment. If we think about our own experiences in school, the things that happen between the age of 5 and 18 are very central to our whole frame of reference for looking at the world. Our first kiss, our favorite teacher, our prom night, our best friend or friends, playing a given sport, all of those profoundly deep and often extremely positive emotional connections are to the type of school we went to. And so to try and imagine, and we may have relatives who work at public school. We may have people that are, everybody around us on our street is likely to go to public school. And so the expectation that this is some sort of comfortable and easy move that we presume, because we're in the middle of this wonderful private school and know all of its advantages, is a dangerous thing to assume. And what we're really asking for these people who, if they're full pay families, have watched as the public school they went to provided them with everything they needed to be enormously successful in life themselves. And we're asking them, remember all of that. Remember how your parents raised you this certain way. Remember your best friend. Remember prom date. Remember all this. Well, we think you could have done much better if you'd gone to a school like ours. Well, that's almost a comically difficult thing to ask families to do. So the question then becomes, what does it require? What did this case study say is the solution? And the good news is that there is a solution to this dilemma and this challenge. Certainly, it almost is comically true that commercial ads are not going to cut it. It's not going. You see a postcard that comes in the mail is not going to overcome 13 years of experiences and emotional ties to this way of being raised. The truth is, it's only genuinely helpful advice or perceived advice coming from the most trusted sources, and only in person. In other words, a booklet of testimonials doesn't cut it. A social media or Twitter feed simply doesn't cut it. And so the question then is, how do we leverage this? How do we create these word-of-mouth opportunities? How do we say, I want to set up formal means of establishing that this works? And here's the tactics, and this I'm not going to walk through this. That would be not a good idea, but it is here for anybody who wants to go to the SSATB website. They can go to the page that refers to this, and you can find this page and then walk through. Just a convenient page to have. There also is, all my talking points today are on that, so you can go there and have those. And there will also be training materials on that in about a half an hour after the training session. I'll be putting those, sending those along to Karen. So what I did was I set up a parent admission network. I call it the PAN. There's actually a better name that somebody came up with, Friends Admission Network, FAN or FAN. It works on 2 levels, but I use the word PAN. And it's, how do I set that up? Well, I started with the help of a trustee, because I was new to the school, with the help of a set of trustees finding and identifying the most articulate and loyal parents. And they don't necessarily have to be the most articulate, but it helped to start with that. Because really enthusiasm is just as important, sometimes even more important than being an articulate booster for the school. But these were loyal parents who loved the school, who would understand immediately the value, or smart enough, and maybe business people themselves, understand immediately the value of doing that, the financial impact of it. I walked through word-of-mouth power, basically walked through effectively this slideshow or a variant of it for them, so I could explain the difference it would make, and their value and influence. The reality is that this parent admission network has delivered now something in the neighborhood of $2 to $3 million in net present value at a cost of about $5,000. And you can use that, because I've set the example of it. You can say, well, this particular school had a massive influence, and this core group of 7 to 10 families can have a massive influence on the school's financial health, particularly if you're a school, and this is most especially if you are a school that's under capacity to some extent and can fill spaces and fill slots. But a way of expressing it to these families to give them some sort of fuel for getting excited about this is, not everybody can give a $20,000 check to the development office, but if you just get one family in an otherwise under capacity class to come, and you are a K through 12 program, you can conceivably be contributing, helping that family find a school that's great for their child, and if they're a full pay family, help the school to the tune of about $230,000 in net present value per child for, from that family's tuition payments over time. Now, I do want to emphasize that this is not about being Agway salesmen. You're not getting your parents, even though it sounds like it, or may sound like it, your parents are really, their job is to nudge to take a look. It's not a nudge to write a check or to apply or to anything other than, you guys got to go check it out. It's a great school. And so there are real limits to this role. And if any of your Parent Admission Network volunteers find absolutely no one after 3 years, they will have still done a service by saying nice things about the school. The other question I sometimes get from families is they say, well, what if something they say is wrong? I mean, I'm not trusting that someone outside my office is going to always have accurate data or that. And the reality is that is absolutely, believe it or not, something you need to worry about. You just do not need to worry about that. If I went to Middlebury College, if I'm in my neighborhood and I say nice things about Middlebury and say, oh, you want to study Arabic, well, they have schools in these 3 areas of the Middle East. If I get one of those schools wrong, if I confuse one city with another, no one is going to call Middlebury College up and say, you sent out a happy alumni and he said nice things about your college, but he got the location of one of your schools wrong. They're going to know that I'm just enthusiastic and love the school, particularly if they're volunteers. Now, if they're giving a tour, which they wouldn't, because this is really not about that. It's not about any stage in the admission funnel other than the inquiry stage. Then you might be, wanting to make sure that they have their details right. But at this stage, you're really, and you don't want them saying stuff that they know is wrong. That's a different thing. But you don't have to worry about them being unduly enthusiastic, because everybody, it will be extremely obvious that they're in a volunteer capacity. So I train them. We have an early training process where I walk them through the process. Though frankly, you don't really need to. Everybody intuitively knows. They know their friend. They're going to know what the buttons of that friend are in terms of nudging them to take a visit. I have a workbook that allows them to identify acquaintances. I basically have them go through all the contact points, Little League games, the synagogue, the church, a coffee break, a surgeon they work with, a partner of the law firm, somebody they have lunch with at the cafeteria, tennis clubs, all those different places. By the time that, and the good news about this as well, is that this requires one meeting with your Parent Admission Network a year. So unlike maybe setting up for a big auction or all the other work that might go into volunteer work for the school, this is an incredibly easy way for people to have a massive impact on the school's financial health. So you can bill it that way. This is a way, if you're a really busy parent, this doesn't change anything about your patterns. You're basically going to run across these people as part of your regular year of engagement in your communities. And so once you know the things you want to articulate to nudge people forward through this booklet that you review and learn to understand, once you're done with that, you're good to go, and you're free to either talk with people or not talk with people. I will give and then over the course of the year, you might give them a nudge to say, okay, the open house is coming up. Now might be a time, if you've been talking to any family slowly about visiting, now might be the time, or here's an invitation you can pass along. But frankly, they're on their own. One thing I would share about the whole program is you have to legitimately have these differentiatable advantages. If you're not a school that's providing something of significance, then the construct, to a certain extent, ethically, too, falls apart. You really have to, think hard about what you're presenting to them that they're presenting to their friends. I'm very fortunate to be working at Lancaster Country Day. It's an excellent school. It in my opinion, and the data would suggest it is by far the best school in the area. That makes it easier for me and easier for the families to talk to their friends who are simply in the dark about where the school is and need a nudge to learn for themselves about those advantages. So that would be something that would be important to think about. And the answer is it can work. This is just a look at the impact on open house of attendance in the first year. And every year it's been at least this good, if not better. So the cost of PAN, very inexpensive. It's a little more now because I've started to buy really nice gifts for all of my PAN members. I have 128 PAN members, and you can grow from that first year, and even during the first year, to have greater and greater numbers. And frankly, I found that almost anybody can be a really good PAN volunteer. You do not have to have it be just your most articulate or most powerful or most socially connected folks. Sometimes enthusiasm can make up for any of that. And you know those enthusiastic families, and you and your team, and others, maybe the development office, can help you find out who to identify and invite. And we just do our new training once at the very beginning of the year, and so we go over a list of parents that maybe some that have just come into the school who are really excited about the transition, and then invite them to this, and then move forward. It's had a massive impact on our open house attendance, and my sense of the impact on the equivalent commercial advertising would cost about that much to replace just for open house attendance. That ignores for private tours that come in as well. What other things do I do? There's the official Parent Admission Network group that I'm communicating with, but I'm also communicating to my internal community who aren't Parent Admission Network volunteers. I have publications. This publication on the right, Hints from Hamilton Road, very valuable piece, sort of a no-nonsense, tough questions answered piece. And I originally just sent that out to my current parents. I now send it out sometimes to prospective families as well. But for current parents, very valuable way for them to begin to self-advocate, because so much of this is about that broader community really knowing and being able to respond to the tough questions in their community about, well, isn't Hempfield High good enough? Isn't Manheim Township good enough? Isn't Wyomissing good enough? And the answer is this allows them to gently self-advocate for your school in important ways. I also have a Just Good News e-blast that goes out. I try to have it go out twice a month. And this is sort of what I refer to as a reverse Chinese water torture, where I slowly unveil tangible advantages to current parents. And this would be an example of that. I make it incredibly brief, because the signature quality of this of our parents today is that they're too busy. So I never have anything there they need to know. It's always just, here's something special about our school. Here's some research on how it's different than other area schools, both here and nationally for private schools, what separates us. And then, most importantly, pictures, anecdotes of what is going on in the school at that time, because families love to see that. And again, the outcome in those efforts is even higher than the Parent Admission Network activities. And these are indications of extra tuition revenue. This is a net present value calculation from just that first year, but it goes through 14 years of revenue, because when somebody comes in, they don't just come for 1 year, they come for many years. And if you're under capacity, that adds up. Now, this number would be very significant, very different financially if you're already at capacity. But even if you are already at capacity, it further guarantees it. Also, it is likely to bring in greater selectivity to your school. So even if you're at capacity, you still have enormous benefits, even if they're not relative financial benefits. And then this is another example of a more recent indication of the revenue streams from a more recent year. And over time, it's quite considerable. Now, I want to talk about merit scholarships, which actually, in some respects, are deeply connected to word of mouth, at least the way I structure it. For those of you that have had those conversations with board members or personally feel that merit scholarships are simply out of the question, I would suggest taking a close look at this, not necessarily to do this, but at some point I think all of our schools eventually are going to have to, tragically in some respects, some would say, move to a little bit more consideration of merit scholarships, simply because our tuitions are getting so high that there will need to be some tactical means of getting folks, even at the highest ends of the economic spectrum, into the game. And so even if it's for 10 years down the road, or 5 years down the road, or 15 years down the road, to take a look at this and think about it a little bit, I think is a valuable thing for everyone, even those that might not like it at first blush, at first glance. I would also share that our merit scholarship programs, given our specific capacity in 2009, between then and now, have actually ended up allowing us enough financial health to increase our need-based financial aid more than we otherwise would have. That's a little bit of a hard concept to grasp, but it basically, just think of a pie, and 85% of the pie being our tuition. I've expanded our tuition income to such a degree that I've allowed for even greater need-based aid to be allocated. And that is, so for those that say, well, you're just cannibalizing need-based families and giving money to people who don't deserve it instead of people who do, the answer is that that's not true in this case and in most cases when you are not at capacity originally, because you're helping your school so much that you're actually providing a bigger pool of funds from which to be generous with need-based aid. So what did I do, and how is this merit piece connected to word of mouth? The answer is what we do with our merit program, because the original, the best person I talked to about merit was a guy who was the director of admission at Liggett School in Detroit. I'm spacing on the name briefly, but basically what they did at that school was a trustee stepped forward and spent a ton of money advertising. Well, since I am not a big fan of commercial advertising, at least I recognize its limitations, I thought, well, how can we use word of mouth to advertise for us? And what I did was we established through our board members and board members of Franklin and Marshall and Lancaster General, we established a partnership where we would pay for and guarantee a dedicated merit scholarship to employees at these institutions. And the only thing they needed to do in exchange for us doing that, and it would be an ongoing merit scholarship, and it was the merit numbers, they need to be significant. Ours was a $10,000 grant each year. But they would communicate to their employees through letters and emails a Q&A session on campus. So what from a trusted human resources person, they got an offer to come and learn more. And then I brought my own students and parents and people connected with Franklin and Marshall and LG Health to those information sessions so those families could have a direct contact at every stage with someone they could trust more than just an admission officer in a tie. That worked enormously well, and we've since established a regional feeder school merit program where the deal is the same. We give a significant merit scholarship to a graduate from a pool of schools in Berks County, in Dauphin County, where Hershey is, and York County. And in exchange, those schools articulate the date and time, and communicate, rather, the date and time of my Q&A sessions at their institutions, and end up advocating for us as well. They end up, when they know more about the school, they tend to be very happy about it. And so the key part is that it's promoted by people from inside the institutions. And the difference has been significant. Its value in commercial advertising is quite significant, and its value in terms of additional net present value revenue is quite significant as well. This is from all 10, 11, 12, and 13, so 4 years of Merit Scholar matriculates that we would not otherwise have had. So these are people, and it adjusts for attrition and all these pieces. The only reason there's a range there of 1.7, or the reason there's a range there of 1.7 to 5.4, is that we've done so well as a school. We've gone from being 100 under capacity to effectively being at capacity. And so there are two ways of looking at it. One is that, well, now that we're at capacity, it's not a relative gain for the school. It's just, either you're getting merit people coming in or people who would otherwise come anyways. But the problem with that equation, or that half of it, which would be the $1.7 million difference, is that we would never have gotten to full capacity without the merit program. So the merit program's net present value to the school is somewhere between 1.7 million and 5.4 million. And again, it costs nothing, because if these, understanding the net tuition revenue concept, this is phony. It's play money. Not play money is the wrong word. It's ghost money, because you're not actually giving someone a check for financial aid. You're just reducing the amount of tuition coming in. So what you get is revenue from those families that you wouldn't otherwise get. And what we also found is that for every merit scholar that came in, there were usually 2 or 3 that fell in love with the school by having it communicated through trusted people, coming through our process, and then even though they lost the merit scholarship, coming to the school anyways. And so that has provided full pay people that we would not otherwise have had come to our school. On the back of the success of those 2 programs, we now have a community partners program that's just one scholarship, but it has many partners. So we work with Armstrong World Industries, we work with the North Museum here in Lancaster, the Fulton Theater, and all of those institutions do this same communication of the program. And so effectively, out of thin air, I've created between 25 and 30 fairs, effectively opportunities to talk to people where I'm the only game in town. There's no one else there. Families come by, they inquire, they find out about the school. Again, through these partnerships, I've been able to basically generate these inquiries out of thin air. So here's a little indication of the advertising effectiveness and the extra tuition revenue from the two operations, from the two parts of working word of mouth. Here's an indication of the impact it's had on our open house attendance over the past few years that we're very pleased with. And again, as you've seen earlier, our applications are up, and we're up another 13% over 2013, which was even higher than this statistic. So that number, it's not moving up to 70% a year, but it continues to go up, and we're in a different place than we were before. Our enrollment, again, is now at 620 or 614 with an anticipated enrollment of 620, which is our capacity this coming year. And with that, I am done. So happy to answer any questions you might have.
Peter, thank you so much. That was a really interesting presentation. I have a question here from Roland, who's asking, does a family who's awarded a merit that needs additional need-based aid after the merit is awarded keep any of the tuition discount?
We have people who get both, if that's part of the question. But and the merit lasts every year. Now, yes. Does that begin to answer the question, or am I missing something?
No, I think that that answers the question. So that if they do receive need-based aid, they are still eligible for that merit award as well, correct?
Yes. Yes, and what we will often do is, we will sometimes we have a consolation prize as well for people who get really close. And, so they'll get a one-year merit award as a way of saying, we really just thought you were great. And there's different ways of keeping the conversation going after they lose, because it's tough. And we also have a leadership day that has students come in, and it allows us to get a glimpse of character, which I think is an important piece that is harder to find. Other than that, there's no additional requirements for the merit scholarship. There's not a special test. It's just on the regular application, they check a box. The only thing we ask them to do is around the time that they submit their application in the spring, they need to come to this one leadership day that are basically a series of experiential leadership exercises that help the faculty be comfortable with the pick, and allows us oftentimes to make real very different decisions than we otherwise would have made.
Okay, thank you. Haley is asking, with community partnerships, are the Q&A sessions paired with another employee activity, or are they standalone events? And she's asking, do the partners usually do a good job of promoting the event for you?
The answer is they're usually standalone events, and I take ownership of the communication. What I do, I sort of pretend almost that I'm just doing them a favor. There's a template there's usually 3 components to the communication. There's a kind of save the date email, and I write the whole thing. And if anybody wants to email me and ask for an example of that, happy to do that. Then there's a final reminder email that's very similar to the save the date email. And then in between, there's a brochure that looks like the brochures you saw in the presentation. And inside the brochure is an insert with a specific invitation to that year's event. And so between those 3, it tends to be fairly good. And each place will have a different environment for that Q&A. Like F&M gives me a room. LG Health, I have tables at each of their 4 campuses in the area. The feeder schools, I have a table at drop-off or pickup, depending on when they think it's going to be most productive. And eventually, you're really becoming a partner with the head of the school and the human resources person, and really wanting them to feel like they're excited about the program. So the other thing we did was we made it as easy as possible for those folks to be happy with us. The first year with F&M, out of the 6 applications, and it was fortunate they were strong, we accepted 5 students and gave 3 of them financial aid, 1 of them nearly a full scholarship. Then we gave the merit scholarship, and then there was a full pay that came in. So F&M felt wonderful about it, and then we provided this end of the year follow-up email that sort of shared how well the program is working for both their employees and for us. We also have as one of our partners a local set of realtors who can nominate any of their clients for the Community Partners Merit Scholarship. And what we did for that was we had an area realtor whose husband was head of a big real estate operation, and he identified the families that sell the most high-end homes in the area. So we effectively made a deal with those people and said, you can offer this to any clients you've had who bought a home from you in the last 3 years, including moving forward, but we ask that you come on tour at the school. So you brought those folks in, they learned about the school, and they can much more easily sell the school to their clients. And it gives them the latitude to have their clients go to any district to buy a home, because they, you know, if they're satisfied with what Country Day has to offer, it doesn't matter where they live as much. They can live in any place, whether it's a good school district or bad, and still be in good shape. So that was a community partners option that worked quite well for us.
Great, thank you. John is asking, what would you recommend to boarding schools for corporate partnerships?
That's a tricky one. You know, you might want to say, it depends where you are too. If I was I used to work at St. George's School. If I worked there, I might do a partnership, although they might struggle with merit because I think it's against their, you know, league rules. But suppose that they could do merit, you might find, you know, you might find one of the investment banks, you know, or possibly a hospital on the Upper East Side. It might be easier not outside of Manhattan, though. It might be, if it was, you know, out on Long Island, it might be a local, you know, it might be a regional hospital. I would find just a big employer or a wonderful university that would, of course, be, you know, interested in chatting with you about something that would benefit their, you know, their professors' children. And so, you know, and oftentimes some of these universities that are great universities are in rural areas where the public school system isn't very good. So that's an especially good opportunity. So I'd be very selective about it and just sort of pick and choose according to what you think. Basically, you want delivered, you want an audience that's going to care an awful lot about education, understand its value, and be able to pay even if they lose. So, and that makes the university a little less attractive because sometimes they're just not full-pay families if they lose. So you may need, you know, we did it with F&M and we're delighted, even though some of them end up being financial aid candidates, which meets our mission, which is there anyways. But in terms of its broader strategic goal, I mean, the board is directing me, find families that can pay. And that's not all they want, but that is in this particular area, that's the tactical goal here. So you may want to have that as part of your, or you may say, well, I don't even want to do that. I care only, some of this are philosophical and mission appropriate decisions that you need to weigh carefully. But this was some of our thinking as we went into this. By going to LG Health, where there were 600 physicians, many of whom would be full pay, this was an especially adept means of communicating with a big constituency of people who could afford our school. So it's those kinds of tactical things I think would go into it. Probably the most important piece, though, would be to have a connection. It's sometimes very hard to get through from the human resources person who you might be easily able to talk to getting approval. You're going to have a board that may need to weigh in. You're going to have somebody in the legal team whose child goes to a rival school. I mean, there's all kinds of nonsense that can get in the way, and so you've got to be aware that sometimes getting the third best partner, but one where you have a board member on your board that's also a board member on that organization, he's going to, you know, he's going to basically order that human resources office to do your bidding. So, you know, that might smooth. And if you need to call me and ask, you know, what are these tactical considerations as you approach these institutions, you know, how do you get the approval for the arrangement? And there are ways of going about that do require some measure of salesmanship but can be done. The feeder school program is especially easy because you're often working with the owners themselves from the very first phone call. so that they don't have the nonsense of somebody who, for ridiculous reasons, decides they don't want to help your school. If that makes sense. All set.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan is asking, we often hear our current parents say they're reluctant to refer because they're concerned that the families might not be accepted if they go ahead with the admission process.
Mm-hmm.
Have you experienced this, and how do you manage it?
That's a very good point, and it was one that I worried about, especially when I was at St. George's, because we had a greater degree of selectivity than we have at Lancaster Country Day School. I think that because what you're really doing is nudging them to look, not nudging them to apply. That's where you need to kind of lay down some clarity about, saying there's absolutely no downside of the virtue of learning more about options. And if they don't know the character, and oftentimes they do though. They know, I know this kid, he's great. As long as they know, you shouldn't be telling them they're going to get in. But what you should share is that this is really worth a close look, even if it doesn't work out. And there's different schools with different levels of selectivity might want to couch their language differently, but you still can, I think, get away with, you really can do the program as long as you might have to have greater clarity about and subtlety in the language you use. But I wouldn't be scared of that. I mean, they will know if you're doing your job as an admission office. They will know from the very first visit forward that there's a measure of selectivity. They'll get it, and they'll either decide not to apply or to apply. And that's why I think, in part, it's very important for PAN members to know it's not your job to get them to apply. That's our job. And that way you walk away from the risk associated with nudging them to do something that might be emotionally painful if they don't get in.
Excellent.
All set.
Great. Peter, could you share with us sort of the criteria that you utilize for your merit awards and how transparent you make that process?
Sure. Bear with me a second. I'll get a brochure. But basically, it's sort of, extracurricular passion and engagement, academic, and first academic success as measured by references, grades, and their shadow day. Then extracurricular passion and the actual application. So it effectively mirrors. It would be like articulating how your assessment committee makes its decisions. It's just that the difference would be there would be a bigger committee reviewing those candidates, and there would be greater delicacy in choosing, and there'd be greater selectivity than a regular application. So it would be taking the way you normally assess, putting it in summary form, and making sure it's in the brochure. And I'll send along a brochure after the presentation that people can actually read and perhaps use as a template.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We do not have any additional questions at this time, but I would like to say thank you so much. And also, I would like to remind folks that a recording of the presentation, as well as Peter's slides and several other resources that he is very generously sharing with us, will be available on admission.org's webinar page. Hopefully this afternoon. I'm hoping to get to it this afternoon. If not, it will be sometime tomorrow. But I will send all registrants a link to that page so that you can re-listen to or re-watch the webinar, look at the slides, and also go through his resources as well. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and a special thank you, Peter, for providing us with such an insightful webinar.
I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.